Welcome to The Currency of Grief, the podcast where we confront two of society's most taboo topics, death and money. My name is Justin Weidenfeld, and I'm here to serve as your grief financial officer, guiding you through the complex and emotional journey of what happens when money and mortality collide. Whether you're navigating the aftermath of losing a loved one, looking for practical advice on handling pre- and post-death planning, or simply just wanting to start those hard conversations about legacy while you still can, this space is for you. Together, we'll hear real-life stories from real-life people who have navigated the intersection of grief and money and come out the other side. Our guests will share their stories, practical insights, valuable advice, and moments of clarity so that none of you have to navigate this alone. I'm grateful you've decided to join us on this journey. Now let's dive in. So without further ado, let's meet our guests for today's podcast. I'm honored and humbled to be joined in the virtual studio with Margaret Gewirtzman. Margaret and I met through an introduction from a local South Florida estate planning attorney named Barry Hymo. Barry is a friend of the podcast. First and foremost, Margaret is a mother of three. She just made it through summer with the kids, and so we're thrilled for her to spend her valuable time and reflect on her past with us on the podcast. She lives in Wilmington, North Carolina. Margaret's father passed away 12 years ago, leaving behind a messy probate situation, including complications with property, land, and a complicated family dynamic with multiple family stakeholders. With limited support, these complications extended the probate timeline, the cost of her settling her father's estate, and ultimately prolonged her ability to grieve and really find closure. Her experience and the lessons learned has emphasized the importance of proper planning for her family and not leaving a burden to her children or anyone's children for that matter. Margaret, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. I'm really pleased to be here.
Amazing. So we dive in pretty quickly. Just tell us why, when we had our first conversation, when Barry made the introduction, what spoke to you about this podcast? Why did you want to come on the podcast and share your story?
I have found that many people I've talked to over the years had a little bit similar stories to mine, which is parents aging out who had beliefs about what would happen to their assets with very little planning
Hmm.
and just assumed it would just be handed over. And not only was that not the case, but um, the even the when my father passed, the county clerk's office and the judge looked at me and said, "Oh yeah, it's just simple math. You can totally do this."
Hmm.
And it was like blindsiding me. Like I feel like it's such a failure on everybody's part to not guide. Ultimately, I needed lawyers. Ultimately, it was a multi-year, extremely stressful process. And at the end of the day, nothing that my father had envisioned ever came true.
Wow.
So it really was just like I'm the cautionary tale. Um, and so I want to share that to really emphasize, like, have the hard conversations. Like, don't let the parents just do what they want, like walk them into a law office like Barry Hamo's law office and actually have real conversations with the county that they're going to die in, because that's the one that's going to dictate your life once they pass.
Yeah, and you live in Wilmington right now. It's different state to state, it's different county to county. And so that's incredibly important. I love that you said, especially as the younger generation of the generation that going to be inheriting both the assets and the legacy, but also the burden and the responsibility of managing someone's affairs. Well, you're in charge now. Walk them through
Yeah.
what may happen if they're not willing to face it themselves.
And it happens really fast. Like
Mm.
from the time that my father passed in hospice care, the next 24 hours, not only did I like finally look at his lawyer, um, and my stepmom, who was supposed to be co-executor, and she lived on part of the land that was in the asset stuff. And she waived her rights as a beneficiary and walked. She didn't tell my father that she wasn't actually going to fulfill the role that he had asked her and put her into. Um, the portion of the assets, because they're married, that were in their name jointly just rolled over to her as the benefit of being like legally married to someone upon death. But what was left, um, you know, the kids don't get life insurance policy money unless it's specified. It 100% goes to the spouse. So if there was a debt, it was like I I found all of this stuff out within 72 hours of his passing.
Well, let's call it timeout there and actually take a step back. So let's talk about your dad leading up to the like his passing. What was your role in his life? What was his role in your life? Um, Talk about a little bit more about the family dynamics and really your grief story up until that 72-hour mark after he passed, where
Yeah.
you were thrown into the fire, apparently.
It was really it was so rough. So I'm the youngest of his kids. Well, my dad had 3 wives, and I'm the youngest of 4 kids from his second wife. His third wife came in with 2 kids, so he does technically have 2 step kids, but they were not part of the will. Um, he and neither was there was a child from the first wife that also was not part of the will. Um, I'm the youngest, so I'm not quite sure why he chose to put the youngest person as the executor of the estate, but I do remember him calling me to ask if I would take that role on. Not really explaining what that would mean, who I would need to talk to. I was not given any resources. There was no documents given to me at the time that I had agreed to take on that role about what, where the life insurance policies, what kind of, pensions, the social security money that may or may not be coming, after death, like any of where's the debt sitting? No idea. I had no idea. I had no idea that, any of that. So, but also like in the last, um, additionally, sorry, my my oldest sibling and his family were living on the part of the land that was solely my father's in my father's name. That wouldn't be rolled in over to the wife upon his death. They, I was unaware they were not paying rent. I was also not aware that mortgage loans had been taken against that land to help financially my brother and his family. Um, so there were, alcohol, drug addiction, family dynamics that I had been up to this point kind of shielded from that I now had to face. And that was really shocking. But then in the last week, uh, his illness, like he, his health declined. Um, he started seeing things. He started having psychosis a little bit as his body was shutting down. It was no longer absorbing any nutrients. His body, if he drank water, it wasn't actually absorbed into his body. So the brain starts doing weird things at that point. And it had been happening for a while, but his third wife had decided not to mention it to any of us. how that information didn't want us coming in to help prolong his life. She wouldn't let me get medical information from my father. In that last week especially, like I flew down from Massachusetts, from New York. I had to leave my 3-year-old son, or no, he was 5. His 4-year-old, 5-year-old son who has special needs, high needs, and had to call a friend to come and be there because my husband was in residency and working 18-hour shifts, um, to go sit bedside because the doctors wouldn't talk to me over the phone because she said you can't. um, I had to fight to get healthcare proxy. I had to fight to get what is the term, to be able to see the finances. I think yeah, attorney of power. I at one point, because when a person gets to that point where their systems are shutting down, but he could no longer he was could no longer he wasn't going to benefit anymore by being in the hospital, and the thought was to send him to a rehabilitation center. But then the rehabilitation center said, um, if you send him there and he doesn't get better, he doesn't show progress, then I am, or his spouse would have been, 100% responsible for the cost of his stay at the rehabilitation center. When it came to being financially responsible, that's when my stepmother just walked away from all of it.
Mm. So, take talking a little bit more about your dad and your upbringing. How was money talked about in your home growing up?
There was no mention on how much money people were making. There was no mention about how to run a budget. There was no mention about what savings or an asset. The most it was is, well, his his mom had lived on this land that was given to her by her grandfather who had owned the land for a generation before that. It was like 88 acres of farmland on the
Wow.
Appomattox River.
Hmm.
And he's gonna, there was a big kerfuffle, but it was bigger yet before then, and had been, pieces of it had been given to other siblings of his generation. um but I really want you to take care of this land and your stewardship of this space. But there was no mention about, what does that legally mean?
Mm-hmm.
How is he doing that? There was no mention of, like, yeah, he my father has a high school education. He is, for all intents and purposes, illiterate.
Mm-hmm.
um, he's severely dyslexic. So there was a huge handicap there. Like, he's a very smart man, but he did not have the basic tools, um, to be able to navigate the situation.
Yeah.
um, and he just trusted it would happen.
Yeah. What did he do for work?
So when he was in the Navy, he was a welder.
Okay.
And then when he got out of the Navy, he welded for the Vepco power plant
Mm-hmm.
until he was 55. And welding for that company meant that he was in the cooling waters for the reactors,
Mm.
welding the inside of those water tanks to make sure that the water didn't spill out.
Mm.
And he was forced into retirement, as per his words. Um, and shortly after his forced retirement, cancers started popping up,
Wow.
degeneration of his discs and his vertebrae, a host of GI tract difficulties, kidneys shutting down. Like, and he had been indoctrinated by the Vetco company with the belief that there was nothing dangerous about what he was doing.
Mm.
And was completely safe, and nuclear power had no reason to be concerned in any way, shape, or form being around it. After his retirement from there, he took on trucking, long haul trucking. And so he owned his own truck, an 18 wheeler, and he would spend, weeks on the road navigating back and forth the country. Um, Again, not the healthiest of lifestyles.
Yeah.
Until even that wasn't achievable. Um, yeah.
And
He,
then was he a big traveler, wanted to see the world? Was he like a very
I think
um,
his one dream was to be able to be a captain, like on a ship, like have his captain's license. And he had a dream of being able to you know, sail boats up and down the coast from Florida up to Maine.
oh, that's
Um,
awesome.
and so in his retirement, like in the last, you know, uh, couple of years of his life, actually the first year of my marriage, I was down in Newport News for a year, and he was like hanging out with me while, listening to his courses. He was like audio recording his courses to become a captain. So
Wow. So it sounds like he's a lifetime learner and like really couldn't really sit still, wanted to work or do something
yeah,
um, throughout his entire life.
yeah,
And where were you living? So it sounds like you were living in New York at the time when he
yeah.
got sick. And where was he living?
He was in Virginia.
Okay. And so even the distance as he was getting sick, coming down, not being fully there for the doctors to like tell you the news and the updates.
Yeah, and there was
That's
like, yeah, it's so, and you're relying at that point on, you know, what he could remember from his medical appointments and relay to me. And that's,
yeah.
you know, is, I think the research says in an average doctor's appointment, any patient, doesn't matter age or education, probably retains maybe 25% of what was said in the office visit. So, much less, the doctor's not using, speech, words, vocabulary that would be attainable for somebody like my father, to understand what was actually going on. But he was followed by a bunch of doctors. I mean, he had his kidney removed. He was on dialysis, like abdominal dialysis for a couple of years. He had radical gastric bypass surgery um, at the height of his weight, which ended up, in hindsight, they found a pituitary tumor after he'd already had the radical GI tract surgery. And it turned out that the reason for his excessive weight gain was because of the tumor in his pituitary gland. So he had that removed. But by then, like when you don't have a GI tract, I mean, they removed so much. Um, he just never stopped losing weight.
Hmm, that's challenging.
So
Was as he was declining, it sounds like your stepmom was there and present and like took on like the
I
basically
don't. I think they were in a silent separation. They both lived in the space, but she was not attending any of his medical any of his medical appointments
mm,
at all.
yeah, a lot of the stuff, like a lot of the medical terms that you just mentioned went way over my head, and your statistic of maybe retaining 20 to 30% of what the doctors are saying, maybe if there's two people there it jumps to 40 to 60%,
Yeah, and
so
somebody can take notes,
right,
actually
right.
like write it down.
Yeah, especially as you're getting that news, there is grief and emotion around, hey, we have to do this operation, hey, you need to go to this rehabilitation center. You're like, well, my life is going to change, like, do I want to do this? You're looking at your life, whereas the other person may be able to look at it more objectively and say like at least just retain the information for a conversation later.
Or even ask questions. Like it's a really, I will say it's a really hard to ask useful questions in those scenarios. Like, well, what symptoms am I looking for that mean I really need to come back in? What what should I be noticing if this treatment is not working? How will I know? How will I know if it is working? What should I be looking for to know the efficacy of what this plan is? Or, I know you're telling me this, but it doesn't feel right. Can we check some additional things? It's an easy thing to go against, um, you know, somebody who is perceived as in a power situation like above you, especially he's coming from a background of military. Well, the doctor said it. He knows what he's talking about. I'm just going to do what he tells me to do. We're just humans. Like I'm not bashing the medical community. I have, my husband's a doctor. Most of my friends from college are medical professionals. I have a background in acupuncture and Chinese medicine. Like I get it. It's a lot of knowledge, but it's also a lot of not knowledge. So,
Yeah.
and people
So yeah, you are like the definition of the sandwich generation, where you're taking care of your parents and your children at the same time, and your children, one of your child having special needs, requires more attention. And so then now you're flying down to Virginia to take care of your dad and go to try to get information to help him because you felt the need and the love to do so. And that's a lot on a caretaker.
yeah,
And so during that process and then after, from a grief standpoint, who gave you support?
that is a tough one. Um, I one would hope like my mother would have been there to give support. I mean, she provided a house for us to stay in, so at least I didn't have to do this in a hotel room. Um, but uh, and of course, like my husband took some days off, and he's financially providing for us. But from an emotional standpoint, or even like holding my hand while calling credit card companies and all that stuff, like I didn't really have support. I didn't even know how to ask for support at that point. And I think I had made assumptions about how my siblings would show up for me that didn't necessarily happen. My father was not like, he had some really, really unkind moments that landed harder on my older siblings. And so that colored a lot of the ability to process what was going on, how helpful or not helpful they were in this process. Um, and so it did feel, um, the isolation was significant for me. Um, and you know, instead of going like, uh, yeah, and nobody was holding space to just say, God, that's really hard, Margaret. You shouldn't have to go through it to this extent. This seems unreasonable. Um, there was a lot of telling me what I should be doing, telling me some impossible options that were based not on anything that even resembled reality or having spoken to a lawyer. Um, and so then not only am I trying to fulfill the letter of this of probate court, the letter of the will that we finally found, or the will of what I thought my dad meant when he had spoken to me before all of this, I'm then being given wishes and orders by my siblings, which again became impossible tasks with the resources I was not given. Um, yeah, that's like I did spiral into a deep depression. Um, it did stop any ability of me to start a business. We moved shortly after that from we relocated from New York to Austin, Texas for my husband to start his business. And so now not only am I not near local friends that I had created, or even friends that community I had from Massachusetts who are all friends. Um, I'm in a brand new location, isolated geographically from everyone, including my family members. And I am still being chased by probate court and all of the things that I'm uncovering as the time is going on. It was really, I don't wish this on my worst enemy. Um, I do think the kindest person was the hospice people. My father finally passed in hospice like 48 hours after we transferred him over. Um, but the hospice company uh, called me once a week for like 6 months just to ask how I was doing. They were the only ones. So I death is a lonely, lonely place.
Yeah. First off, thank you for sharing that those emotions with us. And it sounds really challenging. And there's no words that I could say to make that not as challenging.
No. And believe me, I had a lot of rage. I was
Yeah.
so mad. I was having arguments in my sleep, screaming at my father, just screaming my head off. How could you do this to me? But
Um, for those people who are supporting grievers out there, I want to highlight two things that Margaret said, which was the holding of space and saying, hey, that's really challenging without giving advice is incredibly meaningful and valuable. Just validating those feelings is incredibly important. Furthermore, I think when someone is grieving and listen, especially when it's coming from family members, everybody's grieving.
yeah,
But to then be telling someone what to do, giving orders, instead of offering maybe an alternative would be, hey, can I help you call the credit card company? Or is there something that I can take off of your plate to help us move this along from a probate standpoint? Whatever it might be, instead of giving wishes and orders or demands, more so like creating camaraderie and a team element is um, is incredibly impactful. So from an emotional standpoint, Margaret, when if it has, when did it turn from, call it stress, anxiety, depression around and grief around the loss to, hey, I'm making my way through this emotionally, um, and I'm able to smile.
right. Um, God, that's a really hard question, like to answer. Um, Man, this lasted 10 years. It broke relationships between siblings. Some of it strengthened a little bit because it was, three against one at one point. Um, my two closer siblings to me, they did eventually step up after I was like, this is this is impossible. I can't handle this. But I didn't call uncle until like probably 3 years in. Inside of those 3 years, I did have two miscarriages and then carried a baby. So I I myself also pushed myself in ways I should never have, um, assuming I could just do it, and I couldn't. Um, so honestly, like probably last year might have been the first year that I could just really breathe. There's moments like where, there'd be months where I just ignored it. I wouldn't go upstairs because all the paperwork was upstairs, and I would just refuse to walk upstairs. I neglected an entire floor of my house because that's where the stuff was.
Yeah. Yeah. So for those keeping score at home,
Mm,
that's basically 11 years of challenge and
a
struggle.
challenge. Yeah, that was a full-time job. Managing that, trying to get the things done, trying to be present, doing it as a business, but also like navigating the emotional stress that came out of all of that. That couldn't have just been like, gosh, my dad's dead. I'm really, really sad, and then grieve and then go on. Like my other siblings got to do that, but I kept getting like, I couldn't, like, everything reminded me of this situation that I was placed in and the impossibleness of it. Um, and there's, oh, I had a good thought there. Um, yeah. Um, I will say I did get grief counseling, like probably again at that 3 years in. Our dog died, whom we had received from my dad, like when we got married. Um, and that caused my son and myself to really break emotionally. It delayed that long, but because what my dog had represented to us, it triggered um, all this delayed grief for both me and my 5-year-old. And so that's when I sought counseling for the first time for grief, and it was specifically grief counselors. And he had one, and I had one, and we were going together at the same time and splitting up and stuff. So, um, which I do recommend doing, but when you're in a family systems that does have addiction stuff in it, does have codependency on multiple levels in multiple directions, like, boy, howdy, man, that really does uncover a lot. So it does start a whole secondary journey. Uh,
For sure. That you're probably always going to be working on, and that's okay. That's life. That's the journey. As we switch gears from the emotions, I mean, we're honestly never leaving the emotions because the financials are going to uh, intersect with
yeah.
the emotions. But what you mentioned, it happens immediately. So, what were the first immediate action steps that you took and needed to take after your dad's passing?
I immediately had to get the will. I immediately had to I found out that he had a truck that he had just bought and did not click the box that said it would be free and clear upon his death. So there was no way for any of us to pay. I have no idea how he was cleared for the payment of the loan because he didn't have enough income to cover it. Um, so I had to figure out a way to turn that truck in. I had to contact Social Security to announce his death. I had to immediately file with probate court and get pieces of paper of like the death certificate and the certificate that said that I was the executor of office, like executor of the estate. I made a gazillion copies of that because everybody and their brother wanted proof of who I was. Um, I had to go through his stuff, which, by the way, was put all on the porch by my stepmother. So I was not allowed back into the house. I wasn't allowed to go through his files. She handed me the piece of the document that she said this was the will, which was, by the way, marked up. So then I had to go and speak with the probate court judge and ask if this is going to be valid or not. You know, um, I had to um, immediately create a asset sheet of all of his assets to file. And they didn't care about the debts. They just wanted the value of the things that were in his name.
Who's they?
The county clerk's office.
Understood. So dad passed away.
Oh wait, and the announcement, right? We have to put into the newspaper the announcement of his death, and you get a year for creditors to come after and submit
Claim.
claims against you.
Yeah. And it's interesting. Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, and the bank had to go to the bank and try to move his bank account because it was not shared with his wife into an interest bearing checking account. And again, there was like maybe $2,000 in it. But I still
Wow.
had to do that movement and hold that bank account open and have multiple conversations with that bank um, until I got PTSD. And they didn't know. They didn't know how to do that. Like,
So immediate action steps were finding the will, contacting Social Security, getting death certificates, letters of administration, or letters saying that you're the personal representative from the court, going through his stuff, finding out he had a truck, and like with
we'd no way to pay for it.
yeah, with no way to pay for truck. Um, Once you read the will, it was marked up. I assume like with
Yeah, it was marked up, and the judge decided to just like look the other way
hmm,
on it. Because once it's marked, like if pen is placed upon that paper, it is immediately invalidated. And he thought if I just put my initials next to the markings, it made it valid. I don't know where that thought came from,
mm-hmm.
but it is a thought that had been circulating for some time.
Yeah. So I think like you can technically write your own will, like physically, um, but it adds more ambiguity than it does certainty,
Yeah.
especially with all these complex family dynamics. Like that's the last thing that you probably want. So how
And
was
doesn't a will have to be submitted somewhere? Like how do we know that a will is a will? Like shouldn't that be notarized or something like to like registered with somewhere instead of just like, hey, you're making a will, you've paid lawyers to do this, but now somebody has to house this piece of paper
yeah,
that you then have to somehow produce upon death.
a will does not have to be notarized in most to be valid in most of the United States, which
But
maybe
yet we're held to the letter of it legality wise. Oh, and I had to pay bond because I was, even though in the will, my dad specifically said, do not require Margaret to pay a bond to be the executor of the state. I had to because the state law said if I didn't live in the state of Virginia, then I automatically had to pay that bond, and that was $1,600 every year.
so explain to those who don't know, like why and what is a bond and why did you have to pay it as the executor?
So it's kind of like a insurance against me taking somehow just flying away with the money. Because you have the paper that says you're the executor of the estate, you can literally just empty an entire bank account or charge all the credit cards and run.
Hmm.
And so they didn't want that to happen. So I had to pay a bond, a
Oh,
bondsman
wow.
every year. I mean, it'd be one thing if it was once, but it was beyond my control. I couldn't close the whole thing down. It required years of paying it every year.
Yeah. How, and for those keeping score, the estate process for your dad lasted 10 years. So that's
It's a lot of
a
extra
lot of
money to pay somebody.
$1,600.
His name, by the way, was Lucky.
Your dad's
Lucky
name?
Jones. No, the probate off, like the probate company.
That's funny.
Yeah,
Um,
can't make this stuff up.
no, definitely not. So how was the will marked up?
He had changed. Well, I mean, I don't remember exactly what it was, but it was literally like he crossed out a line and initialed his name.
Mm.
or like crossed a line out and added like, oh, this, and a lot of it had to do with like farm equipment that was a joint use farm equipment with the other siblings, like his other siblings that also were on pieces of adjacent like land that had already been carved off and deeded over to them.
Yeah.
And again, all of this stuff didn't happen when my dad's mom passed. It just rolled into my dad's name. But it
Hmm.
rolled into my dad's name because at the time of death, my grandmother did not have any liens against the land.
Yeah. So talk us through this asset sheet that you created and what made up the asset sheet. And you mentioned there was only the assets. They didn't mention the liens and the liabilities.
Yeah. So it was the any cars, any boats, and there was a bunch of rotting boats in the land, but he'd been paying sales tax on. We're real southern redneck. So yes, we had things on cinder blocks. We had things like it, yeah, lean-tos. So all of his welding equipment, all the woodworking equipment that were in sheds, which I have no idea how to evaluate,
Right.
none. Plus, they were so old. They were too young to be antiques and too new to be like are too new to be an antique and too old to be worth anything.
Hmm.
Um, the the house couldn't go on it because it rolled over to the wife.
There are a lot of bank accounts and life insurance.
No, he had one bank account, and if there was any benefits with Vetco Power Company or any other things, I never saw the paperwork. And again, I never got to go back into the house after his death, so I have no idea about any of those documents.
Hmm.
Any one of the any one of the like insurance benefits could have paid for maybe the lien against the land, the second mortgage or the mortgage, and then I could have divvied up the land the way he wanted it and moved on with my life. But
Yeah,
that's not what happened.
that's challenging. Um, and in regards to like any type of military pension or retirement plan, never saw any of those.
Never saw any of it. I know there was something about he left, uh, he was dishonorably discharged or something. So I think they won't give you benefits if
Wow.
that's how you exit, which again is horrifying. I believe he left. Um, they would consider it like a dishonorable discharge because he was dying with pneumonia in a prison, a military prison, because they had like hosed him down with a bunch of water naked in a cell. So it was not and my grandmother had to go and rescue him.
Wow. Oh my God.
So there's a lot of trauma stuff.
Yeah.
So consequently, like if there was any, and I couldn't get records. So I think there was like a Vepco thing I had hunted down, but they said the money for it had been released, but they wouldn't tell me who they had released it to. So I don't know if my brother, who was squatting on the land, had received that funds. I don't know if it was the third wife who had received the funds or what, but I never got to hear where or how much that money went.
So talk us through the land. So this land, from my understanding, is passed down like from your
It was
grandmother.
like 3 or 4 generations
Yeah.
of passing it along.
So there's a
Um,
bit of family legacy there,
yeah.
and then your brother was on the land, and there was a lien against the land, and it seems like your dad and his
Wait. There's even more because the very front of the land, there was a building that was being rented to a church, plus a radio tower that the local emergency medical systems had been using.
wow.
And then mm, things went sour. The church groups was being harassed by locals. So they weren't paying us. And that money had been sort of floating some of the mortgage. When that money left, the house is where my brother's family was staying. That was not, we weren't receiving any kind of payment from them for them living there. And there was a lawsuit saying that from another cousin about somehow the use, because a retaliatory lawsuit because we said the tower had to come down if we were going to sell the property.
Hmm.
And the cousin had been benefiting from rent payments for the use of that tower. It was not on his land.
That's a lot.
There was a lot of pieces.
How big was the acreage?
88 acres.
Okay, wow. And so, how did you navigate that situation?
Um, I, um, my husband and I had gotten in touch with a wealth management lady in Texas, but she had uh, licensed and um, clients all over the United States, and so she used her connections to find me a lawyer who could help me deal with this
Mm,
in Virginia. And so that's like I started just paying him money to help me figure this out. And some of the stuff was good. He helped us, and some of the stuff was backwards, and so wasted some of my time and money. Um, it
yeah.
ultimately we ended up having to sell a section of it off to buy us time, and then when the time ran out, uh, and it was going to be foreclosed multiple times. The land was being going to be foreclosed upon, and I had to use the inheritance from my husband's side of the family's person had passed to like I had to take a loan from that to pay for the land to not foreclose on.
Hmm.
And all of this to ultimately say at the end of the day, after 10 years, and we finally sold the property fully, all of it, even in the incredible disrepair that the people who had been living there left it in. Um, the checks that I wrote to the four siblings who inherited stuff, $10,000 a piece. 10 years, unimaginable amounts of money to not just the lawyers, but my therapist for $10,000 at the end of the day. This was not my dad's vision, even remotely.
Yeah. If you were to reflect back, what was your dad's vision?
He thought that each of us would just like have some building or live on the land, like split it four ways and y'all enjoy the land together.
Yeah.
Which is,
Say goodnight from across the acres.
yeah. Which, again, fantasy land, three of the children didn't live in the state. And the one that was living there was not a good steward of the space.
Hmm.
So, yeah, it was not being really realistic about who his children were and who they were becoming and having the courage to make the right choices for the stewardship of the land and for his own children. He left that to the kids to hold that burden.
Mm. So, what would have been the right decision? And feel free to talk about like the
I think,
misinformation.
yeah, I think ultimately it would have been better for him to have liquidated the land, like sold the land to a different relative who did want to live there. There's a large family um, of relatives who are all related because his mother was one of 12 children,
Mm,
and they all had a boatload of kids. There was a insane number of cousins who were still living in the area. Any one of them would have benefited. Someone of that lineage could have purchased the land,
yeah.
right? It would have still been in our family. His kids would not have had to deal with the all of this, right? He could have been at peace with all of it. You know, I just like the things that I was put through because of this was like at some point I had to like I learned how to set a boundary. My boundary was I was never going to learn how to evict my own family off the land. That's where I drew the line. And I sold it to somebody who um, said he would do it. He wouldn't care.
That's challenging. That's really hard.
Yeah.
We talked about this earlier before we pressed record, but the misinformation out there and the burden of inheriting property, land, um, especially with debt on it, and what it means to hand that down to the kids. Talk us through your thoughts, feelings, and emotions having gone through this traumatic experience around maybe advice on how people should set that up.
I do think cash is king. I think having something that was more liquid is always better because that, any a physical asset, so house, land, strip mall, cars, whatever, they none of them are ever free and clear. There's
Mm,
always going to be a tax on it. There's always going to be a registration fee. There's always going to be a maintenance. There's always going to be liability insurance. There was a fire in the house. Like I had to deal with a fire in the
okay.
house. Are you kidding me? I
Yeah.
mean, so it is not a uh, it's it's not the largesse, the gift that a parent is really understanding. Like it's never going to be what they're thinking it's going to be unless
Hmm.
they're really, really good about being clear. If part of the inheritance includes a self-sustaining fund income of some kind that covers all of the maintenance, property taxes,
Yeah.
management fees that's that you can use to and an already established manager to do it for you. So you're just receiving a check and it's doing its own thing and you don't have to oversee it so hard.
Hmm.
If it's not that setup, then it is an incredible burden to add to somebody. And especially
And
somebody who doesn't have the skills to do it.
right, or an inheritor who is far away and
Yeah.
grieving.
Far away, grieving, no resources. No resources. I was starting out with my family. I had zero. I was 35. I didn't have resources. I had student debt.
Yeah.
So it didn't, um, but like another friend of mine, her father just passed away. And what did he have? There was one house, but there was a bunch of stocks and bonds and things that rolled over. So there was this largesse. So now they could have an addition on their house that they'd wanted for 10 years. They could now actually pull the trigger on
Yeah.
to improve the home that they chose for their grandkids, like for the father's grandkids to have an improved space where they were living in the neighborhood they wanted to be in, had already established themselves. Like that makes more sense to me. And it
Yeah.
was easier to open and close. That process was less than a year for her.
Wow. It sounds like with that situation, there was intentionality behind having a conversation of saying, "Hey, daughter, son, we do you want to raise your kids in my home? If
Right.
so, I'm happy to leave it to you. Here's here are the repairs you need. Here are the ways that you could pay for X, Y, and Z in the home,
Right.
and and like here's the plan. Here's the
Right.
inheritance plan. Furthermore, and the reason I asked about life insurance in when we were going through the asset list was life insurance gets a bad rep, but if there was a life insurance policy that could provide liquid cash, and whether there's stocks and bonds or not, you don't have to liquidate XYZ stocks and bonds in a retirement account or whatever it might be to pay for the house or the property.
Right.
The life insurance, that's a use of life insurance.
Yeah. And the life insurance, you could have taken a loan against a life insurance policy. Life insurance policy would have paid the loan back without you having to put the money in. Like it would have covered the upfront costs that could have ended this in under a year
Mhm.
instead of this like slow death by 1,000 paper cuts that was happening.
And you mentioned you didn't have any resources at this stage of your life.
Yeah.
So if somebody who's listening is facing something similar, what financial or logistical resources would you wish that you would have had in
Right.
this situation? Like, what
I
should we create? Like for
right,
people.
right. Like there needs to be somewhere in the trust or whatever, the fund is very intentionally created specifically for the use of management of the estate into the end of closing.
Mm,
That is all the registrations, the what is it, the bond, but like actually know the cost of death, the medical bills that will potentially be there, like the legal fees, because you're going to need a lawyer. They say you don't need a lawyer. They're lying. They're lying through their teeth.
yeah,
You need a lawyer. Have the estate lawyer already already. The relationship should already be there. Like, and all the contact information, and like, so that bind like the money for death needs to be more than just funeral costs, well and above.
mhm,
um and again, like, I don't know, it's not well advertised. I've never, in all of my time and all of my social media hunting down, no one, nothing, no advertisement anywhere has ever come to me about, here's a thing for cost of death, real practical.
yeah,
So yeah, I would definitely say that's like, of course, during this time we finally started to receive actual money. Like my husband was actually receiving real assets, like real money at this point. And so immediately we got with the wealth management to make a whole document writing out all of these things, writing out like what kind of life insurance policies we were having, who we were having it against, how much we needed to have. Some people may have said that you're over insuring, but I'm like, I just spent a obscene amount of money on somebody who's like, it wasn't that much stuff,
yeah,
but yet it cost me everything. It cost loss of work time. You can't make these calls after hours. You can't go to work. You're going to lose time at work. You're going to lose time with the therapist. You're going to lose time with your kids. You need a babysitter. You got to pay for childcare while you're dealing with all this. These are like the hidden cost of life in the death. Um, Having another like, I didn't know until I spoke with the wealth management company that, or wealth management, or that there are companies that have been around for centuries whose entire job is to close estates, to do this whole process without you ever having to do it. That's what parents think when they say they're going to give the kids some money at the end or give the kid a house at the end. They think that's just the kid's going to get a check and they're happy.
they get all the responsibility and the burden that comes with managing X check, X house.
Yeah. The disrepair, the all of the things.
Was there any type of conversations that you wish you would have had with your dad about money, about life?
Man, I wish I had asked him all these questions. I wish I'd known the questions to ask.
Yeah, the unknown.
And there was a bit of reliance upon him to have this knowledge because his mom had died and that's how he got the rest of the land. I thought he understood how this worked. There's also a sense of like, even to the up to the point that he was drugged to go to hospice and never woke up again, he wanted to live. He's like, my work isn't done yet. I still got work to do. I got work to do. It's like, man, you're dying. There's no work left. But level of denial about the stage of life leaves a lot of mess behind that I don't know if he could have cleaned up being illiterate the way he was. But he had an entire community. He lived it there his whole life. To not have had some conversations about this with people who could have helped him plan better, it's real sad. Like, it's really like, and I just take that as like, take home for myself. Like, it's my job to know all of these things and let the kids know, like, this is how we're going to do it.
Yeah.
Where everything is. Where's the bodies? Where you dig for the bodies? Which thumb drive has all this information?
Right. So, what role do you take on in your family now, and how has this experience changed your approach to life, to planning?
Um, we have built a lot of assets and life insurance policies. Like, that's where our focus is. Um, I don't want really fancy cars. I'm not really concerned with really flashy assets that wow the neighborhood. Um, I'm extremely practical with my finances. So I do want us to have fun. We go on vacations. I like to do things. Let's do something.
Mhm.
But like, I've got a ton of little baby savings accounts, that are constantly like having a constant drip running of money into them so that when it was time to buy my kid's car, the money was there.
Cool.
And I didn't have to stress about it. I don't know.
How old are your kids now?
I have a 17-year-old, a 10-year-old, and a 6-year-old.
Wow.
I will never not be parenting.
Yeah,
um,
one of our
right.
other,
And then,
yeah, go
right. And
for
then we're looking at college.
it. Yep.
Next year is college. Tuition's going to have to get paid.
Yeah.
You know,
So it sounds like experiences over items, flashy items, being practical, having ensuring that you have the money to pay for the items and looking out into the future a little bit more to plan for the actual payment of these items instead of, oh, my child's 18, they're going to college. Like, what are my options now? No,
right.
you probably thought about college a couple years ago. You thought about the car a couple years before your child turned 16, 17 years old. So having a plan in place is important from a grief, from a loss standpoint, and from an estate planning standpoint. Have What type of work have you done personally to make sure that they're not, in your words,
Right.
inheriting a burden?
Well, that's interesting you say that because so my husband and I meet with this wealth management lady. Like, we've been meeting with her once a month. She gives us assignments to go, like, grab our social security report so we know how much money we're going to get at 65. She
Mhm.
said the hard things like, my husband has 20 years left. This is the max amount of money he's going to earn in 20 years.
20 years left of working, not of his life.
Correct. 20 years worth of working. And his parents are still alive, and my mother is still alive. Like, the average age of us at this point is gonna be in the 80s and 90s. This is no joke. She can only work to 65, 70, maybe. Maybe we'll stretch it to 70. Um, what does that look like? Do we have enough assets? What realistically do we plan to be spending, forecasting once the retirement hits? What monies are we going to get in? Like, she gets real practical about expenditures, tracking what we're spending. We have to like upload all of our transactions. Like, there's a constant feed going to her tool. So
Mhm.
then we're, we can have a report. This is like over the last 5 years, this is the breakdown of your finances, what you were spending on. Is this
It's,
sustainable? What do you
yeah,
need to change? Right? We're having these hard conversations now. We do have like trusts, like things that will put these life, like upon death, the life insurance policies will fall into different types of trusts. And there's like, we've been explicit about how those trusts are doled out depending on the age of our children. And when do they get to have it handed over to them completely? Um, we have it down to even like, if we both died on the same day, what person would pick our kids up from school? Who would have the first 2 weeks of our children to take care of them? And having conversations with those people and having money set aside to help pay for them taking care of our kids during this time of grief. And then who's going to be the long-term caretakers and how are we financing those people? So
yeah,
our children are considered also an asset. And so the expense of their existence must also be met, and not just burdened onto the people who were gracious enough to say, I'll take your kids and raise them for you if you both die.
yeah. I like how you said your children are an asset because, especially as your 17-year-old is embarking on college, there's an argument that they could be a liability, but I'm just kidding. Um,
If you did your parenting right, they're an
yeah,
asset. If you didn't, they are a hell of a liability. So play your cards right. Front end load that.
definitely. It sounds like, though, I love that you said you actually had the conversation with the people that are going to pick your kids up from school. God forbid something happened to both you and your husband, and and be their guardian for that time. I love that you
And
had the conversation with them because a lot of people who put together estate planning documents, they don't actually tell the people that they're they've been given this responsibility.
right. And I've told my children,
Hmm.
you know, I had these conversations with my 6-year-old. At the time, like whatever ages they are at the time, like the time we've made these decisions, we had this very practical conversation because they do want to know. They absolutely do. They understand like the uncertainty of what will actually happen. And I don't want to shy away from those conversations because it gives them a surety and a sense of like solidness that we've thought through it all. And it's not morbid, it's just practical. In the
Yeah,
next, 6 months, all over again. Our neighbors are different. Our, community is different here. I got to reset all of that.
definitely. I think, yeah, it's definitely, people are lax around this topic, and even if you have experienced something so taxing, it happens. Life gets in the way. And I think the fact that you've had these conversations with your children, the conversations that unfortunately you and your dad never had, that that just plays like so much value in their grieving process. God forbid something were to happen.
Yeah.
And it provides a sense of safety and security throughout your life that, like, hey, I don't want you to be burdened with this responsibility. So this is what we want. Like, and you know that. And you, even as a 6-year old, um, like, hey, you can talk to them in 6-year old language, unlike the medical professionals. Hopefully they may digest 25% of it,
Yeah.
but that's it's not a one-time conversation. And as they continue to get older, you give them more and more information, and you can, that's part of your life, and then you can live the rest of your life going on like experiencing vacations, feeling a sense of safety and security.
Absolutely. And it's it's worth nothing in parenting is easy. And whenever you avoid the hard stuff is going to come back and bite you in the ass. Every single time. To have the hard conversations, because if not you, then who? Who would your child, who do you want your child to hear this from? You know, but nothing worse than like, not only do you have to grieve your parent, but now your very basic needs of housing, food, and economic security is at risk. It's unnecessary.
Yeah. I love the fact that you've put money aside in those situations. Because maybe a 0.01% chance that it happens. But in that 0.01% chance, your legacy isn't tarnished because of the friends that or relatives that you put the responsibility of watching your kids. They have to dip into their own personal savings to watch your kids. That's the worst thing that can happen.
Yeah. And again, that's right. Like, how many days off of work are they going to take to handle the transition? Therapy for themselves, therapy for the kids, movers, like reestablishing like the doctor's appointments and the basic, like enrolling them in a school, getting them new school supplies, like all of that. Just existing, it takes it's resources. So
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Margaret, as we wrap up the podcast, we like to leave our audience with some brief mantras or words of wisdom. And so let's say someone comes to you. They have a complex family dynamic. They just experienced the loss of a parent, and they're left with this roller coaster and potentially the burden of managing property, assets, etc. What advice would you give them financially, logistically, emotionally to help them in their navigate the roller coaster?
your community is bigger than you realize.
Mm.
Reach out to them. Somebody has the resource you need and the knowledge you need. Don't ever believe the line that you can do it on your own. Get help as soon as possible and make sure the help is knowledgeable, not based on family ties or errors of whatever, like solid help. Boundaries. Yeah. And have your boundaries in place. Like, don't sacrifice your life for this.
I appreciate that, especially coming from you, where when we're talking about your grief and the emotional side of this whole endeavor, you said that you didn't have many, if anybody, to turn to for support. And the fact that you said that your community is bigger than you realize, it's the same reason that we have this podcast and we're recording this episode today. There are people out there who have gone through it, who are knowledgeable on the topic, who will sit down with you, who may not know exactly what you're feeling, what you're going through emotionally, but can provide one resource that can get you to the next step. And I'm thinking like of a Mario Kart game.
Oh yeah.
It's like just like one step at a time.
Yeah. And again, it is really one step at a time. You cannot, it's a marathon. It is not a sprint. And you can only do a marathon one step at a time. Literally just one step.
Yes, exactly. Margaret, thank you so much for your time, your willingness to share your story, and your vulnerability here on the Currency of Grief podcast. So many valuable lessons to take away from this episode. Podcast listeners, thank you so much for joining us on this episode of the Currency of Grief. It's a great day to have a great day, so go have a great day. We'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Currency of Grief podcast. My hope is that today's conversation brought you clarity, comfort, and even a spark to start those difficult but necessary conversations in your own life. If you found this episode helpful, it would mean the world to me if you would share it with one other person who you feel this podcast could impact. And please, take a moment to leave us a 5-star review. Your review will help us reach more people who need this resource. Remember, the best time to talk about death and money was yesterday. The second best time is now. Until next time, I'm Justin Weidenfeld, your Grief Financial Officer, and this has been the Currency of Grief podcast.